Baku. That was a good race, wasn't it? Especially if you're Oscar Piastri, not so much if you're Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen. It wasn't all plain sailing though. Oscar Piastri admitted he tried to get past Charles Leclerc in the first stint, but he cooked his tyres. And that's the reason he fell back by about 4 or 5 seconds. His engineer then supposedly told him, don't do that again in the second stint after he pitted, and the lap later he did it. And he went for the move on Charles Leclerc, ignoring his race engineer, but ultimately that's what won him the race. It was a very well-measured drive by Oscar Piastri. I have to say, he's been driving exceptionally well in the past few races, and McLaren are going to have a real fight on their hands next year. I feel like Piastri's starting to come into his own. His qualifying pace is getting better. His race pace is getting better. Next year is going to be really close. But let's talk flexi wings, because it's now the talk of the town. Some footage was dissected from the race of one of the cameras looking back at the McLaren rear wing, and people have noticed how much it flexes. I've put a grid on the screen so you can get a sense of it. In the low speed, the rear wing is normal, but when the car reaches top speed, you can see the rear wing duck down. Now that in itself isn't abnormal. I think plenty of teams have that to certain degrees. We also see it on front wings as well. That's also been a hot topic. What's interesting about the McLaren though, is that the DRS wing flaps lift up slightly because of the wing ducking down. You can notice this really well from the Baku footage, but apparently it was also present at Monza to a lesser degree. This essentially gives some airflow the chance to go through this gap that was created, in theory, reducing drag. A lot was said of McLaren's straight line speed at Baku, with Charles Leclerc particularly impressed by how fast the McLaren was in a straight line. But admittedly, Piastri was behind Charles Leclerc earlier in the race with DRS and still couldn't get past him. He cooked his tyres doing so. So it's not like that is some sort of silver bullet for the McLaren. I'm sure this will be discussed at length over the next couple of weeks. Is it legal? Is it not? Well, if it passes the FIA's stringent test, which I'm sure it has, then it's legal. Is it pushing the rules? Sure, but that's also how Formula One works and how it's always worked. Pushing the boundaries, pushing the rules until you're just on the cusp. If it's intentional behaviour from McLaren and they've designed the wing with that in mind, it's pretty clever, you have to say, and you have to take your hats off to them. I'm sure Red Bull are on the phone to their lawyer right now. Some shout-outs though. Alex Albon, what a drive from him. He stayed ahead of Lando Norris brilliantly. Another example of a McLaren not breezing past another car despite having DRS and their flexi wing. Albon made his race in that first stint, but Colapinto had a fantastic result as well. He's had a couple of good races now, Colapinto, showing that he is actually worthy of that seat. They were due to finish 9th and 10th, which I think for Williams they would have snapped your hand off for, but they got bumped to 7th and 8th after the late crash between Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez, which we're going to take a look at now. What's crystal clear to me and beyond question is that Carlos Sainz moves over. From the overhead shot, you can see that he drifts away from the line and the wall. Why he does this isn't really important for the purposes of this, but it's probably to keep in the slipstream of his teammate ahead. Either way, he drifts over, but very slowly. Perez, on the other hand, doesn't move towards Sainz, but he keeps straight. Even when Sainz is moving over, he probably wants that slipstream as well. He refuses to turn the wheel even slightly. Ultimately, Sainz did move over, but Perez could have avoided the accident quite easily. He just kept driving straight, even when Sainz was creeping towards him. You could also argue he's not obliged to move, which he isn't, but if you don't move, sadly, these sorts of things will happen. The stewards felt it was a racing incident, and that's probably fair. I think more blame goes towards Carlos Sainz, in my opinion. It's a shame because Perez was having, probably his best race in a long time. A whole pit stop ahead of his teammate, Max Verstappen. How often do we hear that? I don't think ever. And it was on pace. Verstappen was stuck behind Albon and Norris for quite some time, but he even admitted after the race he didn't really have the pace and he had some issues going on in terms of braking that he just didn't feel comfortable in the car. Red Bull will be hoping, though, they can get both those cars in the fight, having now fallen behind McLaren in the Constructors' title. Supposedly, they've got an upgrade coming in Austin, which will put them back on pace. Helmut Marko is confident it will take them back to the front. We'll see. Next up is Singapore, one of my personal favourite races. So look out for the race preview this week, and I'll see you there.